Henry McCabe was in California with her 2 daughters on September 7th, 2015. They lived in Minnesota, but they were getting ready to move back. It was the middle of the night, 2:28 a.m. to be exact, when Karen gets a call from her husband. What she hears on the other line is nothing short of terrifying. This is the last time anyone would ever hear from Henry McCabe. Hey humans, it's Hannah. Welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, I do videos on creepy and disturbing things. Let's start with some background. Henry McCabe was 32 years old when he went missing. He lived in a town called Mounds View in Minnesota with his wife and 2 daughters. He was actually Liberian, and he had originally immigrated from Liberia to the United States. He and his family did live in California for quite a while, and they were very active in the Liberian American community there. However, his family then moved to Minnesota, where Henry became an auditor for the Minnesota Department of Revenue. And by all accounts, he was a really devoted family man. People described him as kind, social, confident, just really fun to be around in general. So to recap, he had a great job, he had a great family, and he had a really good standing in his community. No known enemies, let alone somebody who may want him dead. Here is a timeline of the night he went missing and everything that happened. We'll then talk about the aftermath and a bunch of the theories. On the evening of September 6th, 2015, Henry and his 2 friends, William Kennedy and Calvin Johnson, went out for sort of a boys' night. Henry was going to be moving back to California with his family soon, and he wanted one more night out with his friends before he left. They went to a club called Pavlitsky's on 65 in Spring Lake Park, which was pretty close to his home. I'm going to be including some maps from some blogs that I found that reported on this case, because they give out some really helpful visuals to where his home was versus where he was that night versus where they found his body. So I didn't make these maps, but if I include them, I will add a credit to whoever's map it is, whoever made it. But as you can see on the map right now on the screen, Spring Lake Park was pretty close to where his home was. Nothing unusual happened in the club when they were all hanging out there. Although apparently Henry did get pretty inebriated while he was there, which caused his friends William and Calvin to take his wallet and his keys, because they didn't want him to order any more drinks and they didn't want him to try to drive home or anything like that. So they were trying to be responsible friends and make sure he was safe. They left the club at about 1:40 a.m., which means that it was now the early morning of September 7th. Henry willingly got into William Kennedy's car, as William had offered to give him a ride home. But according to William's account, Henry actually got in the car and then insisted that William drop him off at a gas station instead of his home. The gas station that Henry ended up being dropped off at was in a town called Fridley, which was close, but it was in the opposite direction of Mounds View where Henry lived. Either way, William agreed, and he dropped him off at a gas station instead of taking him home. A lot of people, of course, questioned this particular aspect of the story in itself. You can't help but wonder why Henry's 2 friends would be concerned enough about his safety to take his wallet and his key so he couldn't get a bunch of alcohol or drive drunk, but they weren't so concerned about him to make sure that they actually saw him get home. Not only that, but then they dropped him off not at his home without his keys or wallet. It is just very strange that nobody would confirm that he got home, knowing he had no money to take a cab. The other odd thing about this particular part of the story is that apparently William had insisted to investigators that he dropped off Henry at a different gas station than he actually had. William was adamant that he dropped Henry off at the Super America gas station, but police couldn't find any evidence to back up this claim. They looked at the surveillance video of the store that whole night, and there was no sign of William or Henry at the Super America. However, it does turn out that William was simply misremembering where he dropped Henry off. He actually dropped Henry off at a gas station called the Holiday Station. This was a few minutes south of the Super America where he claimed to have dropped him off. The reason they know this is because they looked at other CCTV and they did finally find William, drive Henry into the Holiday gas station, drop him off, and then leave. So that part of the story did end up being true, but it sounds like William had just been confused and misremembered which station it was. But regardless, William was the last person to see Henry alive. Now, the story's about to get even stranger. Henry was dropped off at this gas station at about 2 a.m. that night. In the span of only the next 30 minutes, Henry's phone would ping 3 different cell phone towers, one all the way up in Spring Lake Park where the nightclub was, one in Fridley near the gas station that he was dropped off at, and then once more in New Brighton, a town close to everything but south of where his body would later be found. Think about this for just a moment. These locations were all close to each other, but they were several miles apart still, and therefore it would be absolutely impossible for Henry with his cell phone to ping those 3 different towers in the span of 30 minutes on foot. So that means that Henry, assuming he was the one with his phone, he must have entered another vehicle after he was dropped off at the gas station. My best guess would be hitchhiking, or that somebody offered to pick him up, considering he didn't have money for a cab. So that was kind of the night he went missing. Let's talk about the voicemail, which came from one of these pings. The third and last place that Henry's cell phone pinged was the one in New Brighton, the one that was south of where his body would be eventually found. This is the call that his wife ended up with, the voicemail that was about 2 minutes long, though we don't have recording of the whole thing. So we kind of assume that this was also a pocket dial because that's what it sounds like. So he called Karen at 2:28 a.m. The voicemail is horrifying, as you heard at the beginning of the video. One account says that during that phone call, he told his wife that he had just been shot. And then we hear all that moaning and the groaning and the really, really creepy, horrible sounds. That sounds like some sort of attack on a human, or a human that's in severe distress. And then something weird happens at the end of the call, though again, we don't have recording of this particular part, or at least it hasn't been released to the public. There's all this groaning and sad sounds, and then there's this long pause. And then, according to his wife, she heard somebody say, "Stop it," before the call hung up. I do kind of wonder about this voicemail in general, if it really was a pocket dial. I do kind of can't help but wonder if Henry purposely called somebody from, without holding the phone to his face and trying to secretly call somebody to see if they could know that he was in distress and come help him. Some reports also say that he actually called his brother earlier, and that was one of the earlier cell phone tower pings, and that his brother received a very, very similar call from him with those weird sounds. And that also just makes me question how much of a mistake these calls were. To me, it just seems like maybe he made these calls on purpose and he was trying to get help, but he was with somebody or in a situation where he couldn't show that he was calling for help. Here's the aftermath of Henry's disappearance. Everybody came to Minnesota to come and help search for him. They had nonprofit organizations, they had people from the Liberian American community, all the way sometimes from California, coming to help with the search parties. And then of course we just have law enforcement in general searching the whole area frantically for Henry. And I do feel like I need to add again just a side note that I don't think is important to the story, but again just odd. So there was a nonprofit organization that was actually offering a $10,000 reward for anybody who could get information that led to Henry's discovery. But this organization then retracted the reward soon afterwards, claiming that Henry's wife was being shady, basically. They said she was misleading the public and withholding information, which was then impeding on the investigation. We don't have much more information other than that. It's just a weird side note that, again, I don't think is super important to the story. It still doesn't make me suspicious of the wife at all, personally. I just think that that part was odd, and we obviously don't have all the information about it. So in early November 2015, somebody finally found found Henry's body. I can't tell you if it was the 2nd of November or the 4th because different reports say different things. But regardless, a kayaker was on the lake and they found a body face down in the lake. It was the Rush Lake in New Brighton. The body, of course, this was 2 months later and this body was in the water. The body was so decomposed, they couldn't tell what race or gender or anything about the body. It wasn't until the medical examiner was able to look at the body where he discovered that it did indeed belong to Henry. Weirdly enough, the autopsy finally came back and it was concluded that Henry died from drowning. No other injuries were found on him. He had not been shot like he might have implied on the phone call to his wife. They couldn't find any stab wounds or other injuries on him. They couldn't find really signs of a struggle or self-defense. So I'm gonna tell you right now that this story does not have some sort of neat, satisfying ending. Though we found his body, so we at least know that he passed away. We kind of know what happened to him. We don't know how he got to be in the lake. We don't know anything still, and I still think somebody knows something. So let's talk about some theories. The first theory is that, of course, I'm sure you predicted this, a lot of people think that his wife, Karine, planned his murder. We know that Karine and the 2 daughters were in California at the time of his disappearance and his death. So we know that she didn't directly harm him, but many people think that was a cover-up so she would have an alibi being in California, but that she did orchestrate and plan the whole thing. I don't personally believe that she had anything to do with this. If there was any evidence pointing to her, I would be the first one to admit it, and if she was acting shady or anything like that, but she wasn't acting shady. You could see her at the funeral being just devastated. You could see her on the news. She willingly went on the news and played the voicemail, talked about the voicemail, wonders what happened to her husband. It just doesn't, she's just not acting suspicious to me. I also don't understand why she would release the voicemail to the public at all. I mean, it would be really easy to completely delete it and never give up that information. I don't understand if she had anything to do with it. Why would she lead anybody closer to her? There were some reports that perhaps Karine and Henry were having some marital problems, but again, I couldn't find any reliable sources to confirm this or like how bad the marital problems were, if they existed at all. That's just not convincing evidence to me either. There's just nothing solid linking her to this. To me, I think that's just highly unlikely. The next theory, naturally, is that William Kennedy had something to do with it, the friend that dropped him off at the gas station. So remember how we talked about how odd it was that he would leave his intoxicated friend with no wallet and no keys pretty much in the middle of the nowhere when he knew he had no way of getting home except to walk? Well, a lot of people wonder if that means that he had something to do with it. Maybe his friends planned to take his wallet and keys so that he would be vulnerable. And since Henry can't speak for himself now, maybe William just said that Henry insisted on being dropped off at a gas station when actually William drove him there in spite of Henry's protests. And then he either waited till he was out of view of the cameras at the gas station, or he had somebody else take him somewhere else and then killed him and dumped him in the lake that way. But again, there's just too many things wrong with this theory. My personal opinion is that William was probably drunk too. They were all at the bar, and maybe William just didn't drink as much as Henry, but I have a feeling that William was driving drunk and didn't want to admit it to police, because that would make more sense as to why he got the gas station wrong to begin with, and why he would forget that he had his wallet and or keys, and that Calvin had one of his wallets or keys. I think them all being too inebriated to make good decisions would make way more sense than his best friends orchestrating to kill him right before he moves out of town back to California. Plus, I know this doesn't mean a lot to many people, but police did officially rule William out as a suspect. The next theory is that perhaps Henry was attacked by an animal. There's a theory that maybe he wandered near the lake that he drowned in, and that this animal came out of nowhere and attacked him. This would explain the voicemail sounds, and perhaps he jumped in the lake to try to escape the animal or something like that, and then while he was in there, he accidentally drowned because he was drunk. drunk. I don't think this is it. I think, again, they would have seen some sort of signs that he had been attacked in the autopsy. Even if he was that decomposed, they have really, really advanced technology now for autopsies. They'd be able to tell if he had been scratched or bitten. He would have been mauled somehow. His skin would have been damaged. I just don't think that makes any sense, that it was an animal attack. And remember that his cell phone pinged way south of where his body was eventually found. So that wouldn't make any sense with an animal attack causing the voicemail either, because he obviously didn't die in the same place where he made the voicemail. On top of that, by everything I've read, there is no big animals in that area at all, so that makes it double unlikely. This next theory is one that I think is slightly less unlikely. Still unlikely, but I think it is possible, and that is that this had something to do with the Liberian Civil War. So there's a rumor that the FBI was actually involved in this case, which, if Henry had just disappeared and it was an accidental drowning, they found his body, there's no reason for the FBI to be involved in this. So it is speculated that perhaps Henry was killed because he was Liberian, and it was in relation to the Liberian Civil War taking place at the time. Henry was evidently pretty vocal about the unrest that was going on in Liberia, and perhaps this made somebody angry and they decided to kill him for it. This would make more sense why the FBI was involved, or allegedly involved. I'm not positive that the FBI was. That's more of a rumor. But if they were, that would make more sense. Then yeah, they would be involved in a killing like that. He wasn't linked to any specific incident involving violence in America about the Liberian Civil War. However, I am inclined to think that racism may have played a role here. He was a black man living in America, and he was Liberian when all this stuff was going on. So either he knew somebody that really hated him because of that, or somebody found him that night and it came up and they killed him because of that. I'm just saying it's more likely that than being attacked by an animal, especially because people are killed every day for their race or their orientation or what have you. Maybe he ran into the wrong crowd that night, they drove him to the lake, and because he was so inebriated, he wasn't able to struggle when they drowned him. But that part, of course, is pure speculation. So the next theory is that maybe Henry had been drugged. Maybe somebody slipped some sort of drug into Henry's drink at the club, or maybe convinced him to do some sort of drug in the bathroom or something like that. Henry was not a known drug user, so it's highly unlikely that if this is the case, he did it on his own free will. So the theory then is that maybe he was so drugged up that he accidentally called his brother and or his wife and was making these really odd sounds because he was having a very, very bad drug trip, maybe even hallucinating. And then after the calls, he managed to wander into the lake. This would actually make a little bit more sense because maybe Henry made that call, the voicemail of the weird sounds happened. He hung up, and then we don't know exactly how long after that last voicemail he died. So he then would have time to walk up to New Brighton. He was trying to walk towards his house, and he ended up wandering to that lake really drugged up. He fell in the lake and then drowned. The weird part, though, I haven't mentioned this, but another weird part is that they found his phone in his pocket, but they found the battery of his phone in his other pocket, which to me is odd. I have no idea why Henry would do that himself after he made these phone calls, or if there was somebody with him that was trying to harm him, why, if they were gonna do that, they would put it back in his pocket. Why wouldn't they throw the phone into the lake so it wouldn't be found with his body? But either way, if he was drugged, I don't think the sounds of the voicemail are the sounds of him drowning or struggling to get above the water. I mean, several reasons for that. First of all, like we just talked about, he wasn't at the lake when he made that phone call. He was south of the lake. And then second of all, you'd think if his phone was in his pocket and it was a pocket dial, his sounds would be very muffled. And the sounds on the voicemail are very clear. It doesn't sound like he's underwater or that the phone is underwater. if it wasn't a pocket dial and he had the phone up to his ear, again, why did the cell phone ping in a different place than where they found his body? So I don't know, being drugged does sound like a possibility here, and that maybe the drug was so severe or he overdosed so badly that it just caused him on this bizarre adventure and he hallucinated that somebody shot him. We don't know. The other thing, I guess he could have made that phone call where he died, and then I don't know the area well enough to know if maybe his body then floated up, you know, south to where his body was eventually found. I couldn't find anything in the reports that indicated that, but maybe that's the only explanation I could think of as to why he would ping in the spot, make that phone call, and then why his body ended up somewhere other than where he made that call. Of course, there's the theory that Henry committed suicide. There are some reports that say Henry struggled with depression. He was also having troubles at work. We talked about how he might have been having marital issues. On top of all that, he was behind on his rent, so they were also having money problems. And that's why a lot of people figure he was drinking so much that night to cope with all of these issues he was having in his life. And so perhaps that's why he didn't want to go home. He wanted William to drop him somewhere off where he could harm himself. So then he wandered to the lake and drowned himself, which would explain why there wasn't a struggle or other injuries. However, this still makes no sense. Why was he dropped off so far away from the lake and then decided on the lake to kill himself? And then this also does not explain the strange voicemails or the 3 pings on the 3 different towers. So I'm going to cross that theory out. That just doesn't make much sense to me. And lastly, here's my theory of what happened. But of course, this is 100% speculation, just like every theory is, because we don't officially know. The only people that know what happened to Henry is Henry, and if somebody was with him that night. So I personally think that perhaps William and Henry were both drunk, and Henry decided that he really wanted something from the gas station store. He wanted to buy a snack or something like that, and the reason they went in the opposite direction of his home is because nothing else was open. That store, I actually looked it up, and it's open 24/7, so maybe that was the only store that was open all night so that Henry could go buy a snack or more alcohol or whatever it was he wanted to do. So he had William drop him off at the gas station and totally forgot that he didn't have his wallet. Again, forgetting he doesn't have his wallet, he insists that William can go and that he'll just walk home or take a cab. William, being kind of inebriated himself and really tired, just leaves and obliges, drops him off. Henry then realizes that he doesn't have any money to buy what he wanted to buy, but it's too late. William's already gone. So Henry decides his only way of getting home is to walk home, even though it's several miles away. But what choice does he have? Someone sees him walking on the side of the road in their car and stops to offer if they can give Henry a ride somewhere. Or Henry was hitchhiking to try to get home a few miles away. Either one. And whoever he got in the car with ended up being the wrong person to get in the car with. It was a bad person, or they targeted Henry in some way. My guess is that he either got picked up by a serial killer or a killer, or somebody who wanted to actually rob Henry, but realizing Henry didn't have any money or his wallet, the person then got super angry. Or perhaps, like I mentioned earlier, it came up that Henry was Liberian and this person happened to be very, very racist. So he attacks Henry, and this is when Henry accidentally calls his brother, and his brother gets the first of the weird calls. The killer then drives him to a spot south of the lake, which is where the third ping to his wife happens, again attacking him, and Henry is putting up some sort of struggle. He then drives Henry to Rush Lake, where he dips only his head, forces his head in the water. Henry by this point is either unconscious or he is, struggling or whatever. The killer drives him to the lake, pushes his head under, and Henry, being intoxicated enough where he doesn't really put up a struggle, and the killer kills him. The killer then takes Henry's phone, separates the battery from the phone so that it can't ping and it can't be tracked or anything anymore. Though again, I don't know why he'd put it in Henry's pockets rather than just chuck it in the lake with his body. The other possibility that it's some variation of this, but maybe the person was not actually evil, the person that picked up Henry, but he just dropped him off in the wrong place, or Henry thought it was close enough to his home, etc. And then Henry wandered to a lake and fell in and was too drunk to save himself. The reason I say this is likely is because this happens pretty frequently, actually. I mean, I don't know the person personally, but when I was in college, somebody that was going to college at the time at the same place, this exact thing happened to them. They left a frat party, they were super drunk, nobody was with them, they wandered to the lake, and then they just fell in and drowned. But again, even with my speculation, I mean, there's still plenty of things wrong with my theory, you know, like still the location of everything is confusing. It's still confusing as to why he didn't put up a struggle according to the autopsy, but it does seem like maybe somebody else was involved, considering he was driven to all these different places. There's no way he walked to all those places his cell phone pinged, unless somebody killed him before any of his cell phone pinged and they took his phone and made those weird noises. None of this makes any sense. It just feels like there's some completely other theory that nobody's even thought of, that we would need to only think of after more clues came to light or after somebody came forward and said something. I honestly really hope, I hope every case gets solved, but I really want this case to be solved, and I kind of have this weird hope or faith that someday it will be. I feel like somebody knows something. Somebody saw something that night. Somebody knows who was helping him make the phone calls or who picked him up, or one of their friends was racist and they know they killed this guy, and so the guilt gets to them and their friend comes forward. I don't know, something like that. I just feel like there's some big part that we're missing that hasn't been thought of. This case, very similar to Brian Schaefer, is going to drive me bananas, because it's one of those cases where it's just like we said, we went through every theory and none of them still make sense. Still, none of the theories, there's something wrong with every single theory, and those cases just stay with me forever. Okay, so that's gonna be it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it till the end. Please throw this video a like to help the channel out, and I will see everybody in the next one.